Good afternoon and welcome to White Box at El Barrio Art Space. It's a program presented by 2B and 2C in collaboration with White Box, Music and Art. Today's title is From the Heart, two oboes, a piano and a dancer. Will be introduced by Matt Sullivan, who runs the 2B and 2C gadget. Okay? White Box is proud to have collaborated with 2B and 2C presenting Ken Croquin, The Conduct of Pain, an exhibition outrageously beautiful, in an Emersonian way put together between the artist and nature. Yeah? Everything is online. You're going to be seeing magnificent pictures coming up in a couple of days after we finish the exhibition. And any one of you around town, please come in today until 6 p.m. and tomorrow 11 to 6 p.m. before we close down. All right? I'm going to pass the mic to Matt Sullivan to introduce the program today.
Hi, everyone. Ken and I were together for 23 years, and we had a performance piece that we did called Multiple Oneness, how we are all connected. And now that he's passed, I've started a foundation in Ken's name, and we'll be giving concerts. And one of the things that we consider to be so important is the passing of the torch from those who have been around and done that to those that are coming up and continuing to carry the tradition. I'll be introducing two young players in a moment. First, I would like to read an inspiring article. Since 9/11 affected Ken and me so deeply, I want to read a very important piece by Carl Polnack from the Boston Conservatory for his students. And I read it to my NYU students every year. One of my parents' deepest fears, I suspect, is that society would not properly value me as a musician, that I wouldn't be appreciated. I had very good grades in high school. I was good in science and math, and they imagined that as a doctor or a research chemist or an engineer, I might be more appreciated than I would be as a musician. I still remember my mother's remark when I announced my decision to apply to music school. She said, "You're wasting your SAT scores." On some level, I think my parents were not sure of themselves what the value of music was, what its purpose was, and they loved music. They listened to classical music all the time. They just weren't really clear about its function. So let me talk about that a little bit, because we live in a society that the newspaper and serious music, the kind of kids are about to engage in, has absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with entertainment. In fact, it's the opposite of entertainment. Let me talk a little bit about music and how it works. One of the first cultures to articulate how music really works were the ancient Greeks. And this is going to fascinate you. The Greeks said that music and astronomy were two sides of the same coin. Astronomy was seen as the study of relationships between observable, permanent, external objects, and music was seen as the study of relationships between invisible, internal, hidden objects. Music has a way of finding the big, invisible moving parts inside our hearts and souls, and helping us figure out the position of things inside us. Let me give you some examples of how this works. One of the most profound musical compositions of all time is the Quartet for the End of Time, written by French composer Olivier Messiaen in 1940. Messiaen was 31 years old when France entered the war against Nazi Germany. He was captured by the Germans in June of 1940 and imprisoned in a prisoner of war camp. He was fortunate to find a sympathetic prison guard who gave him paper and a pencil to compose, and fortunate to have musician colleagues at the camp, a cellist, a violist, and a clarinetist. Messiaen wrote his quartet with these specific players in mind. It was performed in January 1941 for 4,000 prisoners and guards in the prison camp. Today, it is one of the most famous masterworks in the repertoire. Given what we have since learned about life in Nazi camps, why would anyone in his right mind waste time and energy writing or playing music? There was barely enough energy on a good day to find food and water, to avoid a beating, to stay warm, to escape torture. Why would anyone bother with music? And yet, even from the concentration camps, we have poetry, we have music, we have visual art. It wasn't just this one fantastic fanatic messian. Many people are only focused on survival, on the bare necessity. The obvious conclusion is that art must be somehow essential to life. The camp store without money, without hope, without commerce, or without art. Art is part of survival. Art is part of the human spirit, an unquenchable expression of who we are. Art is one of the ways in which we say, I am alive, and my life has meaning. In September 2001, I was a resident of Manhattan. One morning on September 12th, 2001, I reached a new understanding of my art and its relationship to the world. I was down at the piano. I sat down at the piano that morning at 10 a.m. to practice, as was my daily routine. I did it by force of habit, without thinking about it. I lifted the cover of the keyboard and opened my music and put my hands on the keys and took my hands off the keys. And I sat there and thought, does this even matter? Isn't this completely irrelevant? Playing the piano right now, given what had just happened in the city yesterday, seems silly, absurd, irrelevant, pointless. Where am I here? What place has a musician in this moment of time? Who needs a piano player right now? I was completely lost. And then I, along with the rest of New York, went through the journey of getting through that week. I did not play the piano that day. And in fact, I contemplated briefly whether I would ever want to play again. And when I observed how we got through the day, and then I observed how we got through the day, at least in my neighborhood, we didn't shoot hoops or play Scrabble. We didn't play cards to pass the time. We didn't watch TV. We didn't shop. We most certainly did not go to the mall. The first organized activity that I saw in New York on the very evening of September 11th was singing. People sang around firehouses. I live next to a firehouse, and they did. It was around firehouses, sorry. People sang around firehouses. People sang, "We shall overcome." Lots of people sang "America the Beautiful." The first organized public event that I remember was the Brahms Requiem, later that week at Lincoln Center with the New York Philharmonic. The first organized public expression of grief, our first communal response to the historic event, was a concert. That was the beginning of a sense that life might go on. The U.S. military secured the airspace, but recovery was led by the arts, and by music in particular, that very night. From these two experiences, I have come to understand that music is not part of arts and entertainment, as a newspaper suggestion would have you believe. It's not luxury, a lavish thing that we find from leftovers of our budgets, not a playing thing or an amusement or a pastime. Music is basically a need of the human survival. Music is one of the ways we make sense of our lives and the ways in which we express feelings when we have no words. A way for us to understand things, the way our hearts work when we can't with our minds. Some of you may know Samuel Barber's heart-wrenching, beautiful piece, Adagio for Strings. If you don't know it by the name, then some of you may know it as the background music with the accompanies Oliver Stone's movie Platoon, a film about the Vietnam War. If you know that piece of music, either way, you know it has the ability to crack your heart open like a walnut. It can make you cry over sadness you didn't know you had. Music can slip beneath our consciousness, our conscious reality to get at what's really going on inside us in a way good therapists do. A few of you have ever been to a wedding. Very few of you have been to a wedding where there was absolutely no music. There might have been only a little music. There might have been some really bad music. But the few expressions there is some great music to enjoy. And something very particular happens too at weddings. People get all pent up with all kinds of emotions, and then there's some musical moment where the action of the wedding stops and someone plays, sings something. And even if the music is lame, even if the quality isn't good, particularly 30 or 40% of the people who are going to cry at a wedding like this. Why? The Greeks, the Greeks' music allowed us to move around these big invisible pieces of ourselves and rearrange ourselves inside so that we can express what we feel even when we can't talk about it. Can you imagine watching an Indiana Jones movie or Superman or Star Wars with a dialogue but no music? What is it about music swelling up right at the moment in E.T. so that the softies in the audience start crying at exactly the same moment? I guarantee you, if you showed the movie with music stripped out, it wouldn't happen that way. The Greeks, music is understanding of the relationship between invisible internal objects. I'll give you one more example of the story of the most important concert of my life. I must tell you, I have played a few less than 1,000 concerts in my life so far. I've played pieces that I thought were important. I played at Carnegie Hall. I played in Paris. I made all these very many people happy and pleased critics in St. Petersburg. I played for people I thought were important, music critics, managers, newspapers, foreign heads of state. The most important concert of my life took place in a nursing home in a small Midwestern town a few years ago. I was playing with a dear friend of mine who was a violinist. We began, as we often do, with Aaron Copland's Sonata, which was written during World War II and dedicated to young Copland's friend, a young pilot who had been shot down during the war. Now we often talk to our audiences about the pieces we are going to play rather than providing them with written program notes. But in this case, because we began in concert with this piece, we decided to talk about the piece later in the program and let just come out and play the music without explanation. Midway through the piece, an elderly man seated in a wheelchair near the front of the concert hall began to weep. This man, whom I later met, was clearly a soldier, even in his 70s. It was clear from his buzz-cut hair, square jaw, and general demeanor that he had spent a good deal of time of his life in the military. I thought it was a little odd that someone would be moved to tears by that particular movement and that particular piece, but it wasn't the first time. I've heard crying at concerts when we went, with concerts as they finished this piece. When we came out to play the next piece on the program, we decided to talk about the first piece and second piece, and we decided to the circumstances in which the Copland was written, and mentioned its dedication to its downed pilot. The man in the front row of the audience became so disturbed that he had to leave the auditorium. I honestly figured that we would not see him again, but he did come backstage afterwards, in tears and all, to explain himself. What he told us was this: during World War II, I was a pilot, and I was in an aerial combat situation where one of my team's planes was hit. I watched my friend bail out and watched the parachute open, but the pilot's planes, which had been engaged in return fire and machine gun across the parachute cords so as to separate the parachute from the pilot. And I watched my friend drop away into the ocean, realizing that he was lost. I had not thought about this for many years. During the time for the first piece of music you played, the memory returned to me so vividly that it was tough. It was as though I was reliving it. I didn't understand why this was happening. Why not? Why now? But then when you came out to explain that the piece of music was written to commemorate a lost pilot, it was a little more than I could handle. How does the music do that? How did it find these feelings and these memories in me? Remember the Greeks. Music is the study of invisible relationships between internal objects. The concert in the nursing home was the most important work I had ever done. For me to play for this old soldier and help him connect somehow with Aaron Copland and to connect their memories of their lost friends and let them remember the mourn their friend. This is my work. This is why music matters. What follows is part of the talk I gave in this year's freshman class when I welcomed them a few days from now. The responsibility I will change. I will charge your sons and daughters with is this. If you were a medical student and you were here as a med student participating in appendectomies, you take your work very seriously, because you would imagine that some night at 2 a.m. someone is going to waltz into your emergency room and you're going to have to save their life. Well, my friends, someday at 8 p.m. someone is going to walk into your consult and bring you to a mind that is confused, a heart that is overwhelmed, a soul that is weak. Whether they go out whole again will depend partly on how well you do your craft. You're not here to become an entertainer, and you don't have to sell yourself. The truth is, you don't have anything to sell. Being a musician isn't about depending on a product, like selling a used car. I'm not an entertainer. I'm a lot closer to a paramedic, a firefighter, or a rescue worker. You're here to become a sort of therapist for the human soul, a spiritual version of a chiropractor, physical therapist, someone who works with our insides to see if they get things right. Frankly, ladies and gentlemen, I expect you not only to master music, I expect you to save the planet. If there is a future wave of wellness on this planet, of harmony, of peace, of wellness on this planet, an end to war, of mutual understanding, of equity and fairness, I expect it will come from a government and military. I don't expect it to come from the government or military for fairness. I no longer even expect it to come from the religions of the world, which together seem to have brought us to much more war, as they pierce as opposed to peace. If there is a future of peace for mankind, if there is to be an hopeful understanding of how these invisible forces, internal things, should be fit together, I expect it will come from the artists, because that's what we do. As in the concentration camp and the evening of 9/11, the artists are the ones who might be able to help us with our internal invisible lives. This is important for artists to know, that their role is counts, that they can. I've invited two NYU students here to perform for you. Dan and Cece are, Dan is just out of NYU, and Cece is just finished her master's this summer. And they're here to play for you. Dan, would you introduce what you're playing as you go, if you don't mind? Dan Shin-Kwan and Cece Gao.
Hello everyone, I'm Dan, this is Cece. I'm a student of both Professor Sullivan and Professor Lucarelli, and it's my great honor to play here, and especially in this great art gallery surrounded by Kin's art pieces. Seeing Matt play live a couple weeks ago in a very long time, more than a year, is very emotional. Was a very emotional and a very shocking experience. The last time I hear him playing Multiple One is when I was in his home at Alphabet City, trying to learn how to. He was trying to show me how to use those looping machines, and seeing him playing the piece again a couple weeks ago just brought me a lot of tears, because it reminds me of what happened in the past year in all of us. So knowing that Kin's art pieces are about being alive and about being influenced by the outside factors and let the nature complete it, we are here to offer some music to try to be one of those factors that leave a markings to Kin's artworks and to try to carry on Ken and Matt's legacy. So the first piece we're going to play is one of the Baroque pieces that Bach wrote, Baroque music always brought me a sense of innocence. I think no matter our race or our age, we all have a sense of innocence in us. And especially in the Baroque piece, composer doesn't really write articulations in the piece. So to interpret these pieces on the scene is what we consider play from the heart. So the next piece we're going to play was composed by Anton Doráti. Doráti was a Hungarian composer as well as conductor. He used to be the music director at the National Symphony Orchestra in Washington, D.C., and later on at Detroit Symphony Orchestra. This piece was once in a while considered as the modern Hungarian Rhapsody for oboe and piano. So as you listen to this piece, you might be able to recognize a lot of the Hungarian or Romani folk tune quality in this piece, especially in the first movement that we're going to play. We picked this piece because this piece is the best piece in our repertoire to represent and to echo to the ideas of Ken's art making. We feel like this piece has a really dark spirit in it, and being able to play it, it's a process of us trying to make it alive.
failed to introduce Beatriz Martino, my partner for 2B&2C, and a wonderful choreographer and a great person. That was extraordinary, Grace. Thank you so much for leaving these spirits on the wall with your music. I'm going to close the program with a short piece based on Amazing Grace. It's called A Graceful Maze. Right? It is a part of 9/11. A children's choir sang outside my apartment after the buildings at a firehouse. So, Barbara, thanks for being here.
Yeah.
3 generations of oboe players in this building, huh? Well,
Come back.
See you, Professor.
Seven.
Thanks very much. Thanks to Juan Fuentes and his team, Kyoko Soto and Alejandro, for making this an extraordinary time in our lives. I think I speak for everyone. So thanks for tuning us in, and we'll talk to you.